So welcome everyone. We are very excited to welcome you all and have Peter Russella present among us today. So just a quick introduction. I'm Professor Nevine El Nossery. I'm a professor here in the Department of French and Italian. And I work mainly on Francophone and post-colonial studies with a focus on women's creativity. And I wrote two books. One is entitled Arab Women's Revolutionary Art Between Singularities and Multitude, that was published in 2023. And another one about fictional testimonies published about the Algerian Civil War, published in 2011. And I also published a few co-edited volumes. That I'm not going to state here. I'm mainly interested in focusing on, as I said, women's creativity, but also trauma and memory studies and the relationship between art and politics. So today it's very relevant, the topic that Pete Russella is going to present today. So today's sponsors are European Studies, the Middle East Studies Program, and the Institute for Regional and International Studies, National Resource Center, the IRIS NRC. And for today, just to share with you some logistics, SE Lenschner will be running tech support. If you have any challenges, you can use the chat function to contact her. And just to let you know that we will be recording today's event and sharing the link and digital resources on in a post-event email. So you will only show on the recording if your microphone is turned on to speak. So otherwise, you are not going to be visible on the recording. So also, I just for sure want to present our dear colleague in the French department, Peter Russella. He is a graduate student at the University here of Wisconsin-Madison, where he is writing a dissertation entitled Au Faux Tournant, the Lighthouses of French Language Literature, Comics, and Film. He recently published a French and comic studies article entitled Making the French Lighthouse Breton in Emmanuel Lepage Armen in contemporary French and Francophone studies. On campus, he teaches French language comics in his own department, comics from around the world, in Professor Adam Kern's Introduction to Comics and Graphic Novel course. And he has studied drawing with cartoons and cartoonist Linda Barry in the art department for nearly a decade. He's also a literary translator specializing in comics. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Peter to start his presentation. So thank you very much. And we will have Pete, of course, present, and then by the end of our session, we will have like a period of 15 minutes, maybe Q&A and discussion. So thank you very much all for coming. And Pete, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor. I really appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here. Can have somebody confirm that the windows aren't blocking the right side? We're okay? All right, wonderful. I'm really happy to be here. I'll introduce myself a little bit more in just a second, but we're going to be talking about teaching migration through comics, in particular in Hakim's Odyssey, which I have right here. I am very dedicated to teaching comics, sharing comics, talking about comics in every way I possibly can. And so my big goal today is to talk about not necessarily this comic, but through this comic, how you can introduce new ideas to your students and make tough subjects like migration a little bit more accessible to them. So the plan is I'm going to talk for about a half an hour here. I've got a bunch of different things I'd like to share with you, and then you're going to go ahead and do a breakout exercise. We're going to come back and talk about it. I'm going to give you sort of a follow-up example of a Great Migration comic translated from French, and then we'll all chat together. So this is me. That's me in my garden. I am working on my PhD, as Naveen said. You can call me Pete, and I use he, him pronouns. I really like lighthouses. That's what most of my research is about. And I wrote my first article about a comic about a lighthouse. That was really wonderful. I also have translated oops. I've translated the comics that are on the screen, in addition to several others. That has been a really rewarding practice. And I don't have a lot of other people in my life that speak French. And so it's been nice to take some comics and make them accessible in English. The book that we're talking about is Fabien Toulmé's Hakim's Odyssey. It's in three books. In book one, he goes from Syria to Turkey. In book two, from Turkey to Greece. And in book three, Macedonia to France. We're tracking his journey from his home in Syria, which he left in 2001, to France, where he's lived since. Let me do this so I can have access to those things. Excuse me. Um, on this since 2015. And so on this journey, he left Syria, he went through Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, and then eventually France. This is a nonfiction comic um, based on 60 hours of interviews between Toulmé and Hakim over the course of about a year and a half. When Hakim leaves home and he starts his journey, he eventually meets his future wife, and they have a kid together during his trek, his 4-year trek um, towards Western Europe. And uh, his main motivation is to um, have this story written down for his son. Um, and as for the artist, it's just he wants to share the story of these Syrian refugees that are arriving in France. And so I want to show you real quick.
Hey
Um,
Pete,
yeah.
do you want to try resharing? Because right now we can see the presenter view of the slides, which is still good because we can see the slides, but maybe you can stop and reshare and that might fix it.
Okay, cool. I wrote myself some notes. I think I can just, sorry about that. I'll just go back to this. Is that better? Cool.
Yes.
All right. And I want to just say also these works, all three of them add up to about 1,000 pages or so, and they could definitely be read separately. Toulmé does gives us probably 10, 20 pages of intro at the beginning of every new volume. So uh, you don't have to tackle the entire thing at once. This is a short strip that I've cut out of the middle of a page towards the end of book one. And I wanted to show you the types of drawings that are here and some of the content, I suppose. And so I'm just going to read this to you. This is Hakim talking. I never would have imagined this happening to me. I guess that anyone can become a refugee. If your country falls apart, you fall apart with it, or you leave. He comes back to this time and time again in the series where he just gets into an awful situation and cannot believe it. Um, as for us, as for what we can do with this work, there are so many different options. You can talk about the narrative. in relation to current events, to geopolitics, to history, to migration, obviously. You can talk about nonfiction or interview-based writing and how that sort of translates into comics compared to how it might look in an article or something like that, or in a longer book. You could talk about how you talk about serious things in accessible forms. This could be comics, this could be different types of videos, all kinds of other things that you could do with it. And then the one that I'm going to kind of show you today is how to do a close reading, like some very straightforward literary analysis, textual analysis, art analysis of the way these pages work. Before we get there, I want to walk you through a little bit about the world in which into which this comic was published. We talk about Franco-Belgian comics because so many of them are Belgian. As a matter of fact, they're not necessarily French. The Smurfs came out of Belgium, so did Tintin. You might have heard of them. Uh, Lucky Luke and Blake and Mortimer are less known, but Lucky Luke is the Belgian cowboy story, and Blake and Mortimer uh, solve crimes, I suppose. But these are Belgian examples that everyone who speaks French for the past 100 years or so has been aware of. There are French ones, obviously. If you've ever studied French, you know Astérix Le Gaulois. And he's been a popular character for half a century now, at the very least. But every single market, I'll say, because there are pretty much three really big comics markets. There's the American market, there's the French language market, and then there's the Southeast Asian market. And within every group, there are people that fight over the definition, and there are people that fight over who invented comics, which is where we get this sort of topic of proto-comics. And so we know that Hakim's Odyssey is a comic, but what happened before? Where did it come from? And so lots of people point to Rudolf Topfer, who was a Swiss artist in the early 19th century, the 1820s, 1830s. And these have been translated really, really well by David Kunzel, who is kind of a heavy hitter in the comics world. But this is what they looked like. And lots of people in the French comics world point to this as evidence that a French speaker invented comics. Some of them are funny, they're mostly funny, but they comment on society quite a bit. Um, but even more people go further back and they talk about text and image as a definitive feature of comics. And if you're looking at text and image, you can go all the way back to tapestries and stained glass windows and all kinds of other things like that. And so the Bayeux Tapestry is really often cited as a proto-comic. This tapestry depicts the Battle of Hastings and a bunch of events leading up to it, and was made right after, around 1066. I was going to look up how long it was, and I didn't, but it's several hundred feet long, I think, and was just recently given back to England from France. But what you can see here is that there's information stitched into it. There are words stitched into it to accompany the figures. And so lots of people point to that as sort of the origin. And my personal favorite is that people go 15,000 years ago to say that France invented comics in the Lascaux caves where they painted these incredible paintings on the ceiling. And definitely will be it's a bucket list trip for me to see these things. But what we're interested in here is the way that stories are told over time in drawings. If you kind of wander through the different caverns, you see the same stories being told in little bits. And so that is a comics-like element. Now, every single place, like I said, likes to every single place around the world, if you go to Japan or India or Korea, or if you come to America, every place is going to have their origin story, the proof that they invented comics. There are people who are fighting back against that a little bit, and I think that the way that you do that is through a more universal definition of comics that's less exclusive and more interested in comics as a mode of communication, and not just a medium. And Professor Adam Kern, who teaches Japanese here, is doing that actively and really, really well. I have trouble sometimes with those arguments because they bog us down in something that's less interesting to me than is the actual reality today, which is that there is an absolutely incredible diversity of contemporary French language comics. And that is in the stories that are being told, the drawing styles, the writing styles, the lengths of projects, the literal shape of the book. There's so much fun stuff that you can do. And so I just wanted to click through and show you a couple examples. This is Johann Svar's The Rabbi's Cat. You can kind of take a look at the colors. He's got this creaky line that I really like. This is a comic by Cash from the Ivory Coast, talking about some very real stuff in an accessible form. This is one that I just taught a couple weeks ago. It is Etienne Davido and Chris's Un homme est mort, a story about making documentary videos to inspire workers to strike, which is kind of an interesting one. Claire, I don't know how to say this in English, Bretéché, writes a lot about women, writes a lot about mothers in a very, very interesting way, and you can see how different her drawing style is from some of the others. And then there are people that are really messing with the mediums, media, I suppose. This is The Photographer. This book exists in English, by Emmanuel Gilbert and Didier Lefebvre, and Frédéric Lemercier did the colors. There was it's set in the late 80s. There was a Doctors Without Borders trip that hired a photographer to accompany them in Afghanistan during the war between Afghanistan and Russia, the Soviet Union, I should say. And so this comic tells the story of the photographer and uses his photos to do it. And so the entire book is this incredible clash of really powerful photos of Afghanistan in the late 80s, and then the story part that's told in comics form. As for comics by the numbers, France has the third largest comics festival in the world in Angoulême. Attracts between 200 and 300,000 people every year. What's really great about comics festivals in France is that if you stand in line for hours and hours and hours to get your book autographed, you don't get an autograph, you get a full page drawing. They'll spend about 5 or 10 minutes with you, and they'll talk with you and talk about why they're drawing what they're drawing. And so that's pretty exciting. Comics are respected as the ninth art in France. They are listed alongside architecture and sculpture and music and literature and so many other things, and these other art forms, as a real thing. It is not at all a secondary sort of art form that's beneath anyone else. A quarter of the books that are sold in France are comics, and everyone, the people who are buying them are probably not what you would picture. The average age of comics readers is around 34. 50% of comics readers are over 40 years old. And 88% of comics readers also read other books. And so, despite the fact that we often talk about weaning kids off of comic books, as if they will keep them from reading books. That doesn't seem to be the case, and I don't really believe that that's the case. We are faced with a particular situation in the United States, and I saw that some of you are from all over the place, which is really great. These things are expensive, unfortunately, especially if we're talking about foreign language works. It I more frequently than I would like to admit spend $50, $60 getting a book shipped from France to here because I just really want to read it. And so the thing that I've learned to do in my wonderful years of experience and going to school is to have other people buy them for you. And so I started applying for grants 5, 6 years ago to get funding for the library to start a French language comics collection. And all of that money that I helped raise with Laura Martin, who's a librarian here, and Professor Anne Vila, who's a professor in the French department. The money that we put together has now been more than doubled, and they did an absolutely beautiful thing probably just a couple of weeks ago. I went into the library to grab a book, and the books were all gone, and I got really nervous for just a second, but then I turned around and they had spread them out over there were so many all of a sudden that they had spread them out over the next shelf. So this collection is growing and it's really great. And so just remember that with these things, uh, accessibility is a very, very important part. If students can't see the book when they go to the library or in your classroom, they might not be interested. And so cultivating these sorts of collections is really, really important. In addition to that, I would like to, I think that you got a link to this. You will get a link to this. Another one of our librarians, Kimberly Rooney, did a research guide that I can't, this is just a picture, I can't scroll down, but did a research guide that links with the stuff we're talking about today. And so she's done really wonderful descriptions of all of these different comics, of different origins, of French language origins. And so you can definitely find something that works for you. So what do we do when we have this sort of thing? I'd like to start with a sort of tangential Hakim topic. We have all these different names, comics, graphic novels. We talk about French stuff. We talk about American stuff. We talk about proto comics. We talk about contemporary comics. And I've written about this in the handout that I think was linked to you. It looks like that. So you can have my sort of take on it on that document. But with a book like Hakim's Odyssey, we're in an interesting position pretty much with just how to sell it, how to talk about it. It was branded in America as a graphic novel. I call it a comic. The actual fact of it is that it's nonfiction. It's a biography. It's uh, it's almost like creative nonfiction, really. It's a very creative form of this type of long form journalism. And so you don't have to, I mean, if saying graphic novel gets it into your students' hands, use it. It's fantastic. But if you want to have an interesting discussion about it, I really would encourage you to think about the difference between a graphic memoir, a graphic journalism, a graphic novel, which for me ought to be fiction, and just calling it comics. You have the choice. There's a bunch of people will fight over whether or not you've made the right choice. But that's not really my thing. You get to decide the type of conversation that you want to have. But one question that you could ask is, what do we call this work? You can ask it at the beginning. You can ask it halfway through your reading. Now I'm going to present to you a couple different techniques, a little bit of vocabulary and a couple techniques for how to read comics past just the story. I assume that your students have read books. I assume that they've read stories of some kind, maybe even a little bit of poetry. And so they can handle the word bubbles and they can handle the story that's being told, lots of them. And so this is how you push it just a little bit further. In comics, you've got different elements that I think that if anybody who's looked at a comic book before knows that these are sort of just things that we don't think about. Word bubbles, thought bubbles, captions, onomatopoeia, panels or frames, and then gutters, which is maybe a new thing for you. And these different parts, labeling these different parts is really important because it's like labeling punctuation, it's like labeling other structural elements of the art form so that you can then talk about more interesting things like symbolism and other uh, types of analysis that the students might be more ready to do. And so you can see word bubbles up in the top where that A is. Those are people talking to each other. Thought bubbles are kind of tricky in this comic because they're not always thoughts and they're not always in a thought bubble with the little circles going up to it. And the difference between the narration in the caption and the thought bubbles is kind of tough to figure out. There are onomatopoeia all over this page, but especially where I've written the D up there when he sighs. The panels, you can say panels or frames, whatever you want. Those are the structural element that we're dealing with here. And something that I am particularly interested in and solely sort of building an expertise on is the way that comics spreads time over space. Each one of these frames is uh, a moment. And in between these moments, you have a space. And that space is called the gutter. You can see that down at the bottom of the left-hand page where the F is. And the general understanding is that when you go from one panel to the other, we fill in that space. And so a really, really fun and pretty basic thing that you can do with your students is ask how much time elapses between the first two panels. And what you'll hear, based on my experience, is that even though there's nothing concrete to really base it on, people will be in agreement. And that something about the way this works is innate. And it's something that we just understand how to do. And that's really interesting to talk about. And so if we take this vocabulary, oops, I left one, didn't I? Yeah, no, I did the gutters too. We're good. And so I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to show you one example here from the second book of Hakim's Odyssey. Here, he's going to be traveling from Turkey to Greece. He's being smuggled with his son on an inflatable dinghy from Turkey to Greece. And as he's going, the motor starts to break down, and the other boats that are accompanying them leave. And so they're just dead in the water floating. And that's where we find our friend Hakim here. So in this scene, I want to give you sort of three options of things that you can talk about. The words, You can talk about the dialogue, the narration, the narrative, the onomatopoeia. You can talk about the panel. You can talk about time and space, time over space, the shape of the panel, the size of the panel. And you can talk about the drawing. You can talk about the color. You can talk about the medium that was used. You can talk about just about anything that you want to art-wise in that respect. And you can combine them, of course. Oftentimes, onomatopoeia are accompanied by different types of lines that show a particular emotion or moment. So this is our page. I'm gonna read this for you. So the boat's broken down. In panel 1, you'll see that Hakim is in the boat where the words are coming from, and near that that white flash in the distance is the other boat going away. It's not me, it's the motor. And then he pulls the cord and we hear it try to start up, and then it coughs to a stop. And someone says, start it back up. I'm trying, pulls the cord again, and then it coughs to a stop. And then someone yells out, no, it can't be. And then another person, by Allah. And then in the caption at the bottom, Hakim is speaking, and he says, the other boat, which hadn't noticed us stop, disappeared in the distance. We sat on the water in a deathly silence. All of our elements are here, except for the thought bubbles, which, as I said before, is a little bit tricky in this comic. If you want to talk about the words, you can talk about the spaces between the word bubbles. For example, in the top left panel on the first page, why aren't they more spread out, for example, or why are they that close? You can look at it in all kinds of different ways. You can look at the onomatopoeia of the motor. You can talk about the sort of wiggly lines around the the sort of burst around the exasperated, panicked words down below. Those are all structural things. The words themselves are very, very short in this case. And so that's something that you can talk about too, that maybe it's, why are they silent instead of making a lot of noise? I don't know exactly what I would expect, but silence in this situation would be very, very unsettling. You can talk about time over space. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 regular sized panels, then a double sized panel, and then an entire page, which we can count as one panel. And so something is happening with the time because of the size of panels that for me, time is slowing down a little bit. And we're feeling more and more lost, farther away from other people, farther away from safety. And then as far as the color is concerned, it's night. This is a lot darker than the rest of the comic. The I won't really talk about the medium because I'd just be guessing, but um, I I love that if you draw waves like that, everyone on the planet will know that it's the sea. I've been drawing waves like that my entire life, and I'm not much of an artist. And here, Fabien Toulmé made one of the best-selling comics in the last 10 years, drawing waves with a little squiggle. And so you can talk about the universality of water. How do you draw water? How do you draw clouds? How do you draw people? Because especially on the right-hand page, they're just little dots. So all of those things together can make for an interesting analysis. So we're just about on time. I did it. So I'm going to give you another page from another double page, I should say, from this passage. We're a little bit later. the boat has all the way broken down and it started to take on water. And so Hakim and some of the other men have gotten in the water to try and kick and push the boat to safety. And so what I'd like you to do is get into your breakout groups, read these pages. You can take turns. Somebody can read it out loud. You can all read it on your own. And then I want you to respond to 3 different levels of questions. Before I get there, I will say, so panel 2, I think you can probably figure it out, but that's Hakim and his son. Panel 4 on the left-hand page, and through that little stretch on the left, you'll see Fabien Toulmé and Hakim on the right being interviewed. And so obviously he's the one doing the interviews. And so he shows up every once in a while in the comic. And then on the right, you'll sort of see things that we have seen earlier in the book in that second to last panel. The questions I've split up into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. These are different ways that you could talk about this book. These aren't things that, and I hope that these could be things that could be a model for how you approach studying other comics. And so the beginner one is to look at these pages and ask, what's moving? How do you know? Is there sound? How do you know? And does this impact the story you're reading? The intermediate questions are, how many times, different times, are depicted in this double page? Is it challenging to read them or is it natural? Does the way they're arranged on the page influence how you understand the story being told? And just as another bit of information, you can think about that as a flashback. How do we think about flashbacks in a narrative sense? Then, or a flash forward even, for that matter. And as for an advanced question, Toulmé interviewed Hakim through an interpreter. He explains in the preface of book 1 that this other person was omitted from these comics. And I'm wondering if that information changes how you read these pages. Explain why or why not. So thanks for your attention up until now. We're going to put you in groups and then I will manage the discussion when we come back. So we're back. I gave you some questions and I hope that you did more than just answer them. And so I would like to know what people talked about. If anybody wants to start.
Well, I'm happy to start if so my name is Chanad Shikosh. I'm the Associate Director of Iris NRC. I wasn't expecting to participate in quite this way today. We had a little trouble because I think my group, Donna and Eleanor primarily, there were a couple of others who couldn't connect properly and couldn't mute or have their screens on. So for various reasons, we chose question 3. And we were discussing the ways in which removing the interpreter from the scene makes the story more direct, more relevant, and more intimate. See if I've got my notes here. That's something, if you have an interpreter present in the story, there's an element of perhaps Hakim has not yet integrated into society, that he's still more of an outsider. There's also an issue with whether you can watch Hakim's responses and reactions and emotions through the interpreter and the relevance the interpreter plays. So I think those were some of the points that I think we wanted to make. And simply the fewer voices. Right, you have fewer voices, it's less cluttered as a story. So
Great.
hope that's
Thanks.
okay. Oh,
It's
and then by the way,
perfect.
we had a bit of a chat about my love of Tintin. So we talked a bit about that too.
Yeah, that was the gateway. That's what got me into this. And now here I am. I know that my group talked about that same question. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything.
We also, in that group, agreed that not having an interpreter there made it more powerful, more direct, as you mentioned, and more present, more involving, more intimate, as you said. And then we're asking the question of Peter, why did he why was he feeling ambiguous about not having the interpreter? And the question came up about having the interpreter sort of provided another bridge or another barrier, depending on how you looked at that role, by having to go through the interpreter. Was it through, Syrian, through French, wherever? So it was an interesting, another angle, so to speak, another perspective of it, another layer of it, if the interpreter had been there. But maybe it was almost more watered down if the interpreter had been there, although it would have been providing more of the steps of integration, of communicating and connecting with others.
Go ahead.
Um, I don't know if this is answering the questions you're supposed to, but I thought I was just saying how I thought it made the whole scene more powerful when all of a sudden you're in the scene and then you're out of the scene, you're pulled out, and you're in reality with the guy talking to the guy, and he's so upset he can't talk. And then you go back to the scene, and then the last panel, which is the largest panel, it's this aerial view of the boat at night, and like sort of how scary that is. So I kind of see it. I mean, that what's interesting about graphic novels is they're almost like movies for me. There is some odd combination of text, and just because so many of us have seen movies, I can imagine this being a movie. That's all I have to say.
And I'll just add, like, I think that's totally appropriate. And I know that when I do a full-on comics unit, uh, I teach it right after film so that I can benefit from the study of different framing and different other techniques that exist in film that can really easily be translated into comics. And so the students feel really empowered because they already know how to do stuff like that. I'm wondering, did anybody tackle the first one? Because it's just we're in a university setting. I get my favorite one is question 3 as well. Um, but I want to make sure that I'm clear about one thing, which is that you can study this stuff at a really basic level too. And that doesn't have to be infantilizing. Like when you look at the bottom right image, no one thinks that the sea is still. And so it should be a really fun part of reading comics to figure out how do we see motion there? How do we read it? And how, like, no one went through and thought about every single squiggly line that represented a wave. You see it, you get it, you understand. And so just making sure that you can um, shine a light on those smaller things that really impact how we read. Is there anybody else that wants to? Donna, hit me with it.
Okay, yeah, well, whatever. It's Anchorage. It's cold. I don't have much chance to talk to adults. I also had not focused in on it until you began this part. The difference between what I'm going to call the dark panels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last 2 on the right page, passing from remembrance to current time, the lighter panel, are the current time where he's being interviewed, and I like that. I think my kids could be taught to understand. Oh yeah, I get it. Light dawns, And I think you're quite correct, Peter. You feel so darn empowered when, because you're going, well, heck, I can do that. And so that's a good point.
Thank you. Yeah.
If no one's
I
going to
think
talk, I got one more thing.
what
As
can
a
I
li
just say that like don't don't hesitate to reward them for the things they already do, you know?
Mhm.
You know how to read this stuff. People have been doing it their whole lives. My students today love Calvin and Hobbes in a way that I cannot express. And and so yeah, they know how to do this. Let them know how to do this. It's really great. You had something else.
Just one little, as a librarian, gutters mean something quite different to me. I mean,
Yeah.
gutters mean the left and the right, that part where the signatures are sewn together, that's the gutter to me. Thank you, because you've enlarged my vocabulary with that too. Had not thought that, of course, there's a break, and the mind, I think you're quite correct, fills in, makes its own story. We all know that when you read, it doesn't matter, Wuthering Heights, and you read it when you were 18 and you read it when you're 38, it's a different book. Why?
Mm.
Because you've edited yourself. And that's what's happening in the gutters that you've told me are now between the panels.
Hmm. If you yeah, it's called an intericonic ellipse in French, if anybody wants to use that instead. But I think that gutter is pretty good.
Did you hear me say merde? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Maybe we can open quickly, have a few minutes for questions. It's 5 p.m., but if anyone has a question for Pete. Because I have a question. Can I?
Bring it on, yeah.
Okay, quickly. Yeah, it will be very brief. So definitely the book the as you mentioned, the panels, the colors, the words, everything is it's complex. But at the same time, I felt that it's he the Fabien, he wanted to make it really simple, right? So the simplicity of the form is paradoxically, in a sense, revealing a complex, reality that is really about politics, about what was going on in Syria, about the different ways of religion between Sunna, Shiite, divide, and so on. So it's a complex history, right? So I was wondering, how can educators, from your point of view, Pete, how can they contextualize such a complex history, with the politics, but also the migration routes and so on through Turkey, Greece, and Europe, without reducing the story to a single story, right? So how the narrative, from your point of view, was capable of challenging the homogenization of the migrant experience in a single entity and so on, and revealing this plurality of experiences and voices. So how we can also, like counter the Western assumptions about Arabs, Muslims, while on the other hand, of course, Hakim, as in page 21, I think, he also, Fabien tell him about how he's also idealizing Europe as well, right?
Totally. Yeah. Um, and that is a big problem, or that's a big question I mean, as you know, in migrant literature and migrant art, of the allure of the West and the mistaken allure of the West. Um, because I don't think that Fabien Toulmé is gonna hear this, I would like to tell you that this is a pretty easily excerpted book, series of books.
Mhm.
I think that if you wanted to talk about sea crossing, you could cut 20 pages from this book and teach that and talk about it as a comic. I think that would be fantastic. There are certain pages on the politics of Syria before the revolution that would be completely uninteresting to an English class in my mind,
Mm.
but would be very, very usable to, again, take those 20 pages, read a comics form in a history class or a civics class or something like that, and talk about the materials that way. I think that as for the homogenization, that sort of study would help because you're saying this is a case study. We're not looking at this heavily trodden path. We're talking about why Hakim left Syria. And that story could be 40 pages, 50 pages of this. And we see protests and we see violence and we see him happy before. And so you can just take that question of like, why leave? Why leave home? Why would you ever do that? And you can take just a chunk of this book and answer that. And the more that it becomes Syria to France and not Syria to Lebanon to Jordan to wherever, it does get a little bit more like Hakim is representing all Syrian migrants in France. And can I say something on that, since you mentioned the different styles and accessibility? I want to just show you one thing. There's another pretty good book that's quite a bit shorter and is totally different. It's called Alpha. This is a fictional one. It's by Bessor and Baru, Alpha, Abidjan de Paris. And this is what it looks like. It is an entirely different world and still a comic. Everything that I taught you before applies. And this is again the diversity. This is a very similar story. Um, sorry, a similar type of migration, similar destination, but in a totally different style and form. And so this stuff is all the we have different voices and we have different pens, for lack of a better way of saying it. There's a lot of diversity in this world. So you got to make sure that you go from Hakim to something else, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Is there any other questions if you would like?
What was the name of this one that's on the screen now? What was this one again? Alpha. Okay.
Okay, so I think that on that note, that it's about specificity, it's about a particular case study, but at the same time, as we all saw from the panels, it's a universal experience that we all can identify with, as you said, leaving a place to another place. So it is this is the beauty of literature, and is to make us experience something that is very unique, but at the same time very universal at the same time. So thank you very much, Pete, for this great exercise. I learned a lot myself, and yes, we are all going to buy and have the the comics or the BD on our nightstand and then in our classroom. So thank you very much all for coming. Thank you very much, Iris NRC for and European Studies and Middle East Studies to organize that. And of course, a special thank to Peter Russella. Thank you.